The signal came in at the dead middle of the night watch, when the Emberwright was 3 weeks out from any port, and the only living sound aboard her was the slow breathing of her forges. Kesh Auren heard it first, because hearing was the whole of what he did. He was 22 years old, the youngest crew member on a ship of 41, and his post was a small round room near the spine of the vessel that everyone else called the ear. It had no windows. It didn't need them. The walls were hung with soft gray baffling to kill echoes, and in the center sat a single chair inside a ring of listening cones, each one tuned to a different slice of the electromagnetic dark. Kesh spent his shifts folded into that chair with the lights down low, eyes half closed, the whole galaxy pouring into his ears as a river of hiss and click and long, slow wail song of distant stars. Most people couldn't stand it for an hour. Kesh had been raised on it. He'd grown up on a relay station out past the Ochre Drift, the only child of 2 signal rights, and before he could walk, he had fallen asleep every night to the sound of the void being sorted into channels. He knew the texture of empty space the way a fisherman's child knows the sea. He knew when it was calm. He knew when something was moving in it. And at 0300 by the ship's clock, something moved in it. The Emberwright herself was not a fighting ship, and to look at her, you might have thought her not much of a ship at all. She was a StarForge tender, a mobile shipyard, which meant she was mostly workshop with engines bolted to the back. Where a warship carried magazines and armor, she carried furnaces, drop forges, printer vats, spooled kilometers of raw stock in 100 alloys. Her job was to go where ships broke down and could not limp home, to catch a crippled vessel in her great articulated arms and to remake her. She was a smithy that could cross the dark. Her crew were not soldiers. They were foundrymen and fabricators, weld divers and machinists, and their captain was a lean, unhurried woman named Marn DeLevin, who had spent 30 years learning that most problems in the void could be solved if you kept your head and had the right tool. She was proud of her ship the way a carpenter is proud of a good-hand plane. She did not think of the Emberwright as dangerous. She thought of her as useful. That was the thing Kesh would remember afterward when everything had turned over. That the most useful ship in the sector had also, all along, been the most dangerous one, and that nobody had understood it, least of all the crew. But that came later. First there was only the signal. Kesh caught it as a wrongness in the hiss. A thread of order in the noise, the way you'd feel a single warm current in cold water. He sat up. He didn't reach for the controls yet. He'd learned not to. When you grabbed at a faint signal too early, you scared it off, filtered it into nothing. Instead, he closed his eyes all the way and let the cones do their work, let the thread thicken, and after a minute it resolved into a pattern he had heard described 1,000 times in training but had never once heard for real. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. A distress call. The oldest one there was, older than any of the species that used the deep bands now, a rhythm so simple and so universal that it had been agreed upon across 100 alien treaties precisely because it needed no language. Anyone could send it. Anyone would understand it. It meant only one thing in every tongue that had ever crossed the dark. Help, we are dying, come. Kesh's hands went to the board and he began, very carefully, to pull the signal out of the night. He layered the cones. He stacked the returns. He fed the thread through the filters and watched it grow on his screen from a shiver into a shape, and as it grew, he began to hear the thing underneath the rhythm, the part that made his skin prickle. Because the SOS was not bare. Riding under the 3N3N3 was a voice. It was not a human voice. It was thin and fluted, with a catch in it, a small trilling break like a bird that has been crying too long, and it was speaking a language the ship's translator caught, and turned into words that scrolled up Kesh's screen in plain flat letters, while the voice itself went on breaking his heart in the background. Please, it said. Please, our air is going, there are children aboard, our drive is dead, and we are falling, and we cannot stop. Please, if anyone hears this, please. We have been calling for so long. Kesh sat very still and listened to a stranger beg not to die, and every instinct he had, every warm human thing his parents had built into him listening to the dark together, stood up and said go. He hit the call to the bridge. Captain DeLevin came down herself. She was that kind of captain. She arrived in the ear still pulling on her jacket, with the night shift bridge officer behind her and old forgemaster Oduya trailing after, drawn by the ship-wide murmur that a distress call always started. They crowded into the little round room and Kesh played it for them, and the fluted broken voice filled the space, and did to all of them what it had done to him. Oduya, who was 60 and had a beard like scorched wire and no patience for anything, went quiet. The bridge officer, a young man named Petter, put his hand over his mouth. Captain DeLevin stood with her arms folded and her head bowed, listening, and when the message reached its end and looped back to the beginning to start again, she let it play through once more before she spoke. "Location," she said. "I've got a bearing," Kesh said. "Working the range. It's close, Captain, that's what's strange about it. It's very close. Half a light day, maybe less. If they'd been calling as long as they say, we'd have heard them a week ago from farther out." "Unless they only just started drifting into range," Petter offered. "Or unless the call only just got strong enough," Oduya said. "Emitter failing, battery dying, it happens. Ship falls apart around you, you patch the transmitter with the last of your power and you scream." He said it flatly, but Kesh saw the old man's jaw work. Oduya had been in the void a long time. He had heard real screaming. Captain DeLevin lifted her head. "Kesh. Anyone else answering?" That was the right question, and Kesh had already been chewing on it. In a settled sector, a distress call this loud would have 3 ships turning toward it inside the hour. He'd been sweeping the bands for exactly that, for the chatter of other rescuers, the acknowledgments, the who else is out there. "Nobody," he said. "The band's empty. We're the only ones who can hear it." The captain nodded slowly, as if that settled something, when in fact it should have unsettled her, and it was only much later that Kesh understood the trap had been laid precisely there, in the emptiness. That the silence around the signal was not an accident, that they had been chosen because they were alone. "Then it's us," DeLevin said. "Petter, wake the drive." Oduya, ready the arms and the medbay. "Kesh." And here she put her hand on his shoulder, warm and sure, the touch of a captain who trusted her people. "You keep them company. Answer them. Tell them we're coming. Nobody dies alone in the dark while we're close enough to hear it. Not on my ship." The crew moved. The Emberwright, which had been drifting, gathered herself and turned her blunt patient bow toward the crying voice, and her forges banked their fires low to feed the drive, and she began to run. And Kesh, alone again in the ear, keyed the transmitter to answer. He never got the words out. Because the moment he opened his mouth to say, "We hear you, hold on, we are coming," he had the message up on his screen in front of him, the words still scrolling, and his eye caught on something, some small ugly detail that his ears had felt before his mind could name it. He froze with his thumb on the key. The voice was looping. He'd known that distress beacons looped. But a person, a real person crying into a transmitter for a week while their air ran out does not loop perfectly. They cough. They pause. They change the words, they lose hope and find it. Their voice gets weaker as the days go by. This voice did none of that. It broke in exactly the same place every time. The same catch, the same trill, the same please our air is going at exactly the same falling pitch, down to the fraction of a tone. It was a recording. That alone meant nothing. A dying crew might well set the beacon to loop a plea and then huddle in the cold to save their breath. But Kesh was a listener, the son of listeners, and he had spent his whole life learning the difference between a sound that was made and a sound that was built, and every hair on his arms was telling him that this crying voice had been built. He stopped the ship answer before it sent. He didn't call the bridge, not yet. He told himself he needed to be sure, and that was true, but underneath it was something colder, a feeling he didn't have words for, the feeling of a hand hovering near a door that is very slightly open when you know you shut it. He took the looped message and he tore it apart. He'd done this 1,000 times with weak signals, peeling a wanted sound out of unwanted noise, but now he did it in reverse. He didn't want the voice. He wanted everything under the voice. He stripped the plea away and listened to the carrier it rode on, the raw shape of the transmission, and he began to find things that should not have been there. He found that the failing battery whine, the ragged dip in power that was supposed to say we are dying, repeated on a fixed cycle, clean as a metronome. A real failing battery sagged and surged at random. This one sagged on schedule. He found that the language of the plea, that fluted, heartbreaking tongue, did not match any species in the ship's registry, and yet the words once translated were suspiciously perfect. There are children aboard, please, if anyone hears this. They were not the words of a specific dying crew with a specific dying ship. They were the words of every dying crew that had ever been imagined. They were general. They were aimed. They were, Kesh thought, and the thought made him feel sick, designed. Written the way a hunter writes bait, to be irresistible to the thing you mean to catch. Written for empathy. Written, he realized with a lurch, for exactly the kind of ship whose captain would say nobody dies alone in the dark on my watch. And then he found the last thing, the thing that turned the cold feeling in his gut to ice. Under everything, under the voice and the fake dying battery and the perfect general words, buried so deep in the carrier that only someone who had been listening to empty space his whole life would ever have felt it, there was a second signal. A tight, hard, directional pulse, firing in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the SOS. It was not a cry for help. It was a report. It was the beacon telling someone somewhere in a code Kesh couldn't read but whose purpose he understood in his bones. Fish on the line. A ship has heard us. A ship is coming. Get ready. Kesh Auren sat alone in the small round room where he had spent his life learning to hear, and for the first time he heard the shape of the whole thing, and understood that the Emberwright was not racing to a rescue. She was racing into a mouth. He hit the bridge channel so hard he cracked the panel. "Captain," his voice came out steadier than he felt, which surprised him. "Captain, kill the drive, kill it now, it's not real. The SOS, it's a lure, it's a trap. There's a hunter under the crying and it just told them we're coming." There was a silence on the channel. 2 seconds. 3. Kesh could picture the bridge, Delevin's face, the natural human resistance to being told that a dying child was a lie. "Say that again," the captain said, slowly. He said it again. He didn't slow down. He gave her the looped break, the scheduled battery, the 2 perfect words, and then the buried pulse, the report, the fish on the line. And as he spoke, he was already pulling the numbers up, already sweeping the dark around the fake signal's source, and now that he knew what to look for, he found them, and his voice caught for the first time. "Captain, there are ships out there, cold ships, powered down, sitting dark around the beacon it's a ring, they're in a ring around it, they've been waiting. 4 of them. No, 5. I couldn't see them before because they weren't making any noise. They were being quiet. The way you're quiet when you're hunting," Delevin finished very softly. "Yes." On the bridge, 3 weeks from any port, alone in an empty band that was empty because it had been swept empty for them, Captain Marn Delevin looked at the tactical picture her young listener was feeding her. The crying beacon at the center, the 5 dark shapes waiting in a patient ring, and her own good, useful, unarmed Forge ship driving straight down the throat of it. And she did the thing that would decide everything that followed. She did not run. Running, Kesh would understand later, was what they wanted. Running is what prey does. A ring of hunters does not close on a ship that is charging in. It closes on a ship that has seen them and turned to flee, presenting its soft, unarmored back, its bright, vulnerable drive. The Emberwright's one advantage in that first frozen instant was that the hunters didn't yet know she'd seen them. To them, she was still a fish on the line, still driving in fat and trusting toward the crying voice. Delevin intended to keep it that way. Kesh, she said, do they know that you found them? He checked. The report pulse was still firing its steady fish on the line into the dark. Nothing had changed in it. Nothing had spiked. Whatever was out there thought its bait was still working perfectly. No, Kesh said. No, Captain. As far as they know, we're still coming to save them. Good, said Captain DeLevin, and something changed in her voice. Something Kesh had never heard from her in 3 weeks aboard. A low iron thing that made the hair stand up on his neck for an entirely different reason. Then we're still coming. Petter, hold the drive. Hold our course and our speed exactly. We do not so much as twitch. As far as those things out there are concerned, we are the dumbest, fattest, most trusting rescue ship that ever answered a call, and we are going to keep being that, right up until we aren't. Captain, Oduya's voice came in from the forge deck, slow and dangerous, an old smith who had just understood what his captain was reaching for. What are we doing? DeLevin looked at the ring of hunters on her screen. Below her, in the belly of the ship, 40 tons of raw alloy sat spooled and waiting, and the great furnaces breathed, and the drop forges hung silent and cold. They built a trap out of a cry for help, she said. They've probably killed 100 ships with it, ships full of exactly the kind of people who come when they hear crying. She turned from the screen. We're a forge, Oduya. We came out here to fix broken ships, so let's go find out what these people are made of, and then let's remake them into something better. She keyed the ship wide. All hands, this is the captain. The distress call is a lie and there are 5 armed ships waiting in the dark to kill us. Nobody panics. Nobody runs. Light the furnaces. We have about 40 minutes before we're in their teeth, and I intend to use every second of it. We are going to walk into their mouth wide open, and we are going to be the worst thing they have ever tried to swallow. The channel clicked off. And deep in the belly of the Emberwright, one by one, the forges woke up, and their fires climbed from banked red to a hungry white, and the ship that could remake anything began, very quietly, to remake herself. 40 minutes is nothing. 40 minutes is an eternity. It depends entirely on what you are building. Kesh stayed in the ear, because the ear was now the most important room on the ship. DeLevin had made that clear in the first 30 seconds. The whole plan she was throwing together in her head balanced on a single knife's edge. The hunters could not be allowed to suspect, not for an instant, that their fish had noticed the hook. And the only person aboard who could tell whether the hunters suspected was Kesh, folded in his chair in the dark, listening to the enemy's own heartbeat. So he listened, and he narrated, and he became the eyes on the back of the ship's head. The report pulse is steady, he said, keeping his voice low and even the way you talk near a sleeping animal. Still firing, still saying we're coming and we haven't noticed anything. 2 of the dark ships just took a bearing off us, little navigation pings, they think we can't hear them. They're just checking we're still on the hook. I'm not answering them. We're staying dumb. Stay dumb, DeLevin agreed from the bridge. Oduya, talk to me. The forgemaster's voice came up from the deep of the ship with the sound of the furnaces behind it, and that sound alone had already changed the whole character of the Emberwright. She had been a quiet ship. Now she hummed. Now Kesh could feel through the deck a low building thunder as furnace after furnace came to full heat, and the printer vats began to churn. I can't build you a warship in half an hour, Oduya said bluntly. So don't ask me for one, but I've been thinking about what I can build, and it comes down to this. A warship fights at a distance. It throws things across the void and hopes to hit. You can't win that fight. We've got no guns and no time to grow any worth the name. A pause, the clang of something enormous being moved. But that's not the fight these things want anyway. Look at how they're set up. A ring, close. They don't shoot ships from far off. They surround them and they board them and they take them apart up close because they want the ship, they want the bodies, they want everything, and you can't harvest what you've blown to gas. These are not gunners, Captain. These are butchers. They come inside. Then we make the inside a bad place to come, DeLevin said. Now you're talking my language. Kesh could hear the grim smile in the old man's voice. Here's what we can do in 40 minutes. We can't armor the whole hull, but we can armor the ways in, every airlock, every hatch, every soft spot a boarder would pick. We can print 1,000 caltrops of monofilament and seed the corridors they'll have to walk. We can turn the cargo cranes and the salvage arms, the ones we use to catch broken ships, into something that catches whatever comes close and crushes it. We've got cutting lasers meant for slicing wrecks. They'll slice a boarding pod just as well at short range. We've got the drop forges, 40 tons of hammer, Captain, hammers that fall hard enough to shape a keel, and anything that gets into the forge deck thinking it's found a soft belly full of frightened smiths is going to find out different. The clang and roar swelled behind him. We can't reach out and hurt them. But we are the single most dangerous thing in the galaxy to touch, and they're planning to touch us all over. How long to see the ship? Give me 30 minutes and I'll make her a maze that eats anyone who walks in her. Give me a plan for the other 10 and I'll make her worse. And that was where Kesh spoke up, because he'd been listening not just to the hunters, but to the thing they'd used, the crying voice, and he had the beginning of an idea that frightened him with how far it went. Captain, Forgemaster, he hesitated, we're thinking about how to survive them. What if we thought about how to catch them instead? The channel went quiet. Go on, DeLevin said. They've got a weapon we don't have, Kesh said. It's not their guns, it's the beacon, it's the crying. That's the real weapon, the thing that fills their ring with victims in the first place. They don't have to chase anyone. They just sit in the dark and cry and the good ships come to them. Everyone who ever tried to help someone. His mouth was dry. I can hear how it's built now. I've been taking it apart this whole time. The looping voice, the fake dying battery, the code underneath. I think, Captain, if I had a little time and the printer vats to make me an emitter, I could build that signal myself. I could build one better, and a signal like that doesn't just call the good ships. He swallowed. It calls them. He let that sit. You're saying, DeLevin said slowly, that their bait would work on the baiters. They've spent so long being the only mouth in the dark, Kesh said, that they've never once had to worry about answering a call themselves. But there's more than one of them out there. 5 ships in this ring. And a ring like this doesn't run itself. Somewhere there's a bigger ship, a mother, coordinating, collecting what they harvest. If a fresh, loud, perfect distress call went out on their own private band, in their own code, from a spot they didn't expect, if it said, in their language, we've got a fat one but we're in trouble, come quick. They'd come running, Oduya breathed. They'd come running to feed, same as their victims, because that's the trap, isn't it? The trap only works on people who come when they're called, and they built the whole thing assuming that's a weakness that belongs to their prey. He laughed, low and ugly and delighted. Captain, I like this boy. So do I, said DeLevin, and for the first time in 40 minutes there was something almost like warmth in her iron voice. Kesh, can you build me that signal? Not in 40 minutes, Kesh said honestly. I need to hear more of their code first. I've only got the surface. I need them to talk more to each other, to their mother, so I can learn the grammar of it. Which means we have to let this get worse before I can make it better. We have to actually spring their trap. We have to be inside their mouth, close enough that they're chattering to each other about how to chew us, before I'll have enough of their language to turn it around. Then that's the plan, DeLevin said, and Kesh understood that his captain had just made the hardest kind of decision, the kind that trades certain danger now for a chance at something greater later, the kind that walks the whole ship deeper into the teeth on purpose. We spring it. We let them close. Oduya makes the inside of this ship a nightmare so that when they come aboard to butcher us, they die instead. And Kesh listens to every word they say while they try and learns their song and builds us one of our own. And then, she stopped. And then we stop being the fish, Kesh said. And then, said Captain DeLevin, we go fishing. The last 20 minutes were the longest of Kesh's life. He heard the ring wake up as the Emberwright drew into it. He heard the 5 dark ships shed their cold quiet one by one, drives lighting, weapon systems coming up out of standby with a whine his cones caught long before any warning board on the bridge did. He heard them begin to talk to each other, and the moment they did, he started recording every syllable, feeding it into the ship's translator and into his own patient hands, pulling the code apart even as it flooded in. The hunters called themselves, as near as the translator could render it, the choir. Their ships were the weepers. And their talk, once Kesh had enough of it to parse, was worse than anything he had imagined because it was so casual. They were not cruel in a hot way. They were cruel in the way a fisherman is cruel, without malice, without even really noticing. They discussed the Emberwright the way men discuss a catch. Big one of them sang in their fluted, heartbreaking voices, the same voices that had cried, "Please, there are children aboard." Big and slow, and it never even slowed down. A tender. Look at the mass on it, full of metal. Full of soft ones too, sang another. Rescue crews. The soft ones always come. That is why we sing the children. The soft ones cannot bear the children. Warden says take it whole. Take the drives intact, she wants the forges. Board at the 4 seams, gut it quick before the soft ones scuttle it. Same as the last one. The last one screamed so nicely. Kesh listened to 5 ships full of hunters chatter cheerfully about gutting his ship and his crew, and he wrote down every word, and every word taught him their grammar, and under the horror there was a cold, clean part of him that was learning very fast and thinking, "Keep talking. Please, tell me everything. Tell me how you sing." "They're calling their leader the warden," he reported. "There's a bigger ship, Captain, a 6th, it's holding back way behind the ring. That's the mother. That's where they take what they harvest. The warden runs the whole hunt from there. And they're going to board us at 4 points, they're calling them the seams." He fed the coordinates up, here, all the main locks. "They want to gut us fast and take the ship whole. They want the forges." "They want the forges," Oduya repeated, and there was murder in it. "They walked all this way to steal a smithy full of angry smiths. Send them to the seams, Kesh. Send them exactly where they want to go. I've made all 4 seams special." "Petter," Delevin said, "sound the boarding alarm, but quiet, internal only. I don't want a single decibel leaking out of this hull that says we're anything but a soft, trusting rescue ship that's just now, far too late, realizing it's in trouble." In fact, and here the captain's voice took on a new edge, a theatrical, deliberate edge, the opposite. "Kesh, open a channel to them, to the crying voice, and let's give them a show." Kesh understood at once. He opened the channel to the beacon, to the fake dying ship the choir was still pretending to be, and Captain Delevin, in the warm, frightened voice of a rescuer who has just seen the shapes closing in around her and does not yet understand, began to speak. "Distressed vessel, this is the tender Emberwright, we have you, we are almost, wait, what are those? I'm reading ships, there are ships all around you, are those? Oh no, please respond. Distressed vessel, please, are you seeing this?" A perfect, rising note of dawning human terror, and Kesh, listening to the enemy, heard the choir drink it in. "There it is," one of the weepers sang, delighted. "There is the moment, that is my favorite moment, when they understand." "Sing them a little more," sang another. "Sing them the children again. Let them die confused." They took the bait of the Emberwright's fear, the way the Emberwright was supposed to have taken the bait of their tears. And in doing so, they came in close, greedy, careless, 5 hunting ships crowding in around one fat, trembling tender to feast, exactly as they had done 100 times, exactly as they had never once been made to pay for. And Kesh Auren, in the dark of the ear, listening to them gloat, felt the last of his fear burn off and turn into something else, something with a hard, clean edge, something that had a lot in common with the white heat climbing in the forges below. The weepers came in. He heard the boarding pods launch, little hard coughs of sound, 4 of them, then 8, then a dozen, streaking across the last of the gap toward the 4 seams. He heard the weepers' guns come to bear, not firing, holding, because they wanted the ship intact. He heard the choir singing to each other as they came, their fluted cruel lullaby, so pleased, so certain, so utterly without any idea of what was waiting for them inside the fat, trusting tender that had never once, in all their long career of murder, occurred to them as a thing that might bite. "They're committed," Kesh said very quietly, and his voice did not shake at all. "All 4 seams. They're seconds out. They think you're already dead, Captain." Captain Marne de Levin stood on the bridge of her useful ship with the ring of hunters crowded in around her, exactly where she wanted them, and she keyed the ship wide one last time, and this time she did not bother to keep it quiet, because the time for being quiet was over. "All hands," she said, "this is the captain. They're coming aboard, let them in." The boarding pod struck the 4 seams of the Emberwright and blew their breaching charges and cracked her open, and the choir poured in to harvest the soft ones, singing. And the forge closed its mouth. What happened in the 4 seams of the Emberwright over the next 6 minutes was not a battle. The choir would have understood a battle. This was something they had no word for, because in all their long history of hunting, they had never once been the ones who walked into the trap. At the forward seam, the boarders came through the breach into a corridor, and found it exactly as their scans had promised. A soft gut, a service passage full of ductwork and cable, the kind of undefended innards a rescue tender was made of. They surged down it toward the crew spaces, singing, and they got 9 meters before the monofilament found them. Oduya had seeded the whole passage with it in the last 20 minutes, a printed web of molecule-thin wire strung corner to corner in patterns no eye could see, anchored to the forge deck's own hydraulics. The first rank of hunters walked into it at a run and simply came apart, and the ones behind them, confused, pushed forward into the same invisible loom, and the corridor that was supposed to be a soft gut became a thing that quietly unmade everything that entered it. At the port seam, the boarders came through into what looked like a cargo bay and was in fact a jaw. The great salvage arms lived there, the articulated crushing manipulators the Emberwright used to catch crippled ships out of the void and hold them still for repair, arms strong enough to bend a keel. Oduya had a machinist riding each one. When the bay was full of hunters, the arms came down out of the dark ceiling where they'd been folded and waiting, and they did to the boarding party what they were built to do to wreckage. At the starboard seam, the cutting lasers, meant for slicing a dead hull into salvageable sections, had been walked out on their tracks and aimed down the breach itself, and they opened up the instant the pod docked, so that the hunters died in the act of coming through, and the pod behind them, and the pod behind that. And at the aft seam, which opened onto the forge deck itself, the place the choir wanted most, the place where the drives and the furnaces and the fat prize of the whole ship lived, the boarders came through into the heart of the smithy expecting frightened smiths, and found 40 of them, and not one of them was frightened. Kesh heard all of it through his cones and through the deck under his feet, the singing, and then the change in the singing, the fluted cruel lullaby faltering, cracking, breaking into notes he had no translation for and needed none. He heard the choir begin, for the first time in their long, unbothered history, to make the sound their victims made. And he sat in the dark and listened to 100 hunters die in the belly of the ship they'd come to butcher, and he did not look away from it, and he was not sorry, and afterward he would carry that in him and not know quite what to do with it, but in the moment there was only the work. Because while the seams became slaughterhouses, Kesh was learning to sing. He had all the code he needed now. The choir, so certain of their kill, had chattered without a shred of caution, and every word had gone into Kesh's patient hands. He had the grammar of their private band. He had the structure of their beacon, the looping voice, the scheduled false battery, the buried report pulse, the whole architecture of the lie. He understood now exactly how a hunter of the choir called out into the dark to say, "I have need, come to me." And he understood something else, something that had been surfacing in the enemy's chatter, and that made the cold, clean edge in him go colder still. The choir talked, as they killed and were killed, about the warden, about the mother ship holding back behind the ring, and in their talk was a picture Kesh assembled piece by piece, the way he assembled a signal out of noise, until it stood clear and terrible in his mind. The mother ship was not just a coordinator, it was a hold. The choir did not kill everyone they caught, not right away. The soft ones, the crews who came running to help, were harvested, yes, their ships taken whole. But the choir had been doing this for a very long time, across a very wide stretch of the dark, and they had learned that a living captive was worth more than a dead one. Prey species that could be made to work, that could repair the taken ships, that could be bred and kept and used, those went into the mother's hold. There were people back there, not choir, prisoners, the remnants of a dozen gentle species who had made the mistake once of hearing someone cry in the dark and going to help. And one name came up more than the others, one prey the choir spoke of with the particular contempt hunters keep for the animal that never learns. The Alu. Small, fluted-voiced, soft-feathered folk from somewhere coreward, and Kesh understood with a jolt whose voice the beacon wore. The crying voice, the please there are children aboard, it was an Alu voice. Of course it was. The choir had caught the Alu again and again because the Alu could not help going to a cry, and somewhere along the way they had recorded one of them, some Alu mother or child begging for real, and they had taken that true and dying voice and made it into the bait they used to catch the next ship, and the next forever. They killed the kind with a recording of the kind's own kindness. They had turned mercy itself into the hook. Kesh Auren sat very still with that, and felt something in him settle into a shape it would keep for the rest of his life. "Captain," he said, the last of the singing in the seams had stopped. The Emberwright had swallowed everything the choir sent into her, and the ship was quiet again, quiet and hot, her forges roaring, her corridors full of what was left of the hunters. "The boarding's done. It's done, but listen. There's more out here than 5 ships. The mother ship, the warden's ship, it's a prison. There are people back there, pray they've kept alive to work. Alu and others, maybe hundreds, maybe more. Whole crews they caught the same way they caught us, except those crews didn't have a forge and didn't have." He stopped. "They've been doing this for generations, Captain. This exact trick, this exact crying voice. We just happened to be the first ship they ever tried it on that could bite back." The channel was silent for a moment. Kesh could imagine the bridge, the captain taking it in, weighing it, the way she weighed everything. "How many of their ships are left?" Delevin asked. 4 weepers still out there, plus the mother. They know something went wrong. The boarding party stopped reporting. Their hold on. Kesh bent to the sound. The 4 surviving weepers had gone very quiet, and their chatter, when it came, had lost its lullaby ease. It was clipped now, uncertain. For the first time the choir did not understand what was happening. "They're scared, Captain. They don't have a word for this. Ships don't fight back. Fish don't bite. They're pulling back toward the mother. They're going to run, or they're going to call the warden and ask what to do." "Then we're out of time to decide," Delevin said. "If they run home and tell everyone that the trick doesn't work on tenders anymore, and they change the bait, and they go right on killing everyone else the same as always, just more careful. And those people in the mother's hold, if the choir spooks, if they think they've been beaten, do we think they keep their prisoners alive?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. "No," Delevin said. "We don't let them run. Kesh, the signal, can you build it now? Can you make me the choir's own voice?" And Kesh, who 3 weeks ago had been the youngest crewman on a forge ship, and had never in his life done a single thing that mattered to anyone but himself, looked at what he had learned and knew that he could. "Yes," he said, "but not from the ear. I need the printer vats. I need Oduya to make me an emitter that can throw their band hard and directional, and I need to be down there to tune it by hand, because it has to be perfect. It has to be better than their beacon. It has to be the most convincing cry for help the choir has ever heard, in their own language, in their own code, and it has to say the one thing that will make every one of them, and the warden most of all, drop everything and come running. He was already moving, unfolding from the chair he'd been in all night, out the door of the little round room and running for the belly of the ship. Because that's the trap, Captain. That's the whole trap, and it's the only one that ever works. It only works on people who come when they're called. Down in the forge deck, in the roaring red heart of the ship, Oduya was waiting for him. The old forgemaster stood among his machines like a figure out of some older, deeper story, the smith at the center of the fire, the maker who stood between the raw stuff of the world and the shape it would take. Around him the furnaces breathed white and the printer vats churned, and the great drop forges hung silent overhead, and the salvage arms folded their scarred manipulators back into the dark, their work at the seams done. The floor was not clean. Kesh did not look too closely at the floor. "Show me what you need," Oduya said, "and I'll grow it." They built the emitter together in 19 minutes, the old smith and the young listener, and it was a strange collaboration and a beautiful one, and Kesh would remember it as the moment he understood what his ship truly was. Because a StarForge tender was not a weapon and never had been. It was better than a weapon. A weapon can only do the one thing it was built for. A forge can become anything. Kesh described the signal he needed, the wave shape, the throw, the fineness, and Oduya turned to his vats and simply made it, grew an antenna array to Kesh's specification the way a gardener grows a vine, printed the emitter layer by layer out of raw stock, and where the design needed something Oduya didn't have, the old man invented it on the spot, because that was what smiths did, that was the whole of the craft. You looked at the problem and you made the thing that solved it, and if the thing didn't exist yet, you made it exist. And while the emitter grew, Kesh built the voice. He built it out of everything he'd learned. He took the architecture of the choir's own beacon, and he rebuilt it clean, correcting the crudeness of it, tuning every element until it rang true. He built the looping distress, and he built the buried report pulse, and he built the false failing battery, and he made them all perfect, better than the choir had ever managed, a masterwork of the exact art the choir had used to murder for generations. And into it, in the choir's own fluted grammar, he wrote the message. Not a cry of pain. The choir did not come for pain, they inflicted it. He wrote a cry of greed. He wrote in their own voice, in their own code, on their own private band, from a point in the dark just past the far edge of the ring. "Warden, Warden, it is third Weeper. We broke from the hunt, we found another, a second ship, a courier gold-hulled, fat with cargo and soft with crew, drifting alone and blind. We cannot take it with the boats we have left. It is too rich to lose and too big to hold. Come quickly, come with the mother, come with everything before it drifts out of reach. Come and feed, come now." He read it back 3 times. He listened to it with the ears he had been born with and raised into, the ears of a listener, the son of listeners, and he asked himself the only question that mattered. If he were a hunter who had never once been prey, who had spent his whole life certain that the crying in the dark was always someone else's weakness, would he come? He would come. God help him, he would come running. "It's done," Kesh said. The emitter stood finished before him, gleaming and new, grown out of nothing in 19 minutes by the ship that could make anything. He looked at Oduya and at the forge, and at the terrible beautiful thing they had built together out of a murderer's own song. "Captain, it's done. We can send it whenever you're ready." On the bridge, Captain Marn DeLevin looked out at the 4 frightened weepers pulling back toward the great dark shape of the mother ship, the hold full of the preyed upon, the warden who had run this hunt for 100 years and never once been hunted. "Send it," she said. And the Emberwright, the useful ship, the fat trusting tender that had come running when it heard someone cry, opened her mouth and began, in the hunter's own voice, to sing. The signal went out into the dark, and Kesh stood in the forge deck with his hand still on the emitter and listened to the choir take the hook. For a long moment there was nothing. The 4 surviving weepers hung back near the mother ship, wary, wounded, chattering their clipped uncertain talk about the boarding parties that had gone silent. And then, from the great dark shape of the mother, from the ship of the warden herself, a new voice rose onto the private band, and Kesh heard it and knew that everything he had built had worked. Third Weeper, the warden sang. Her voice was deeper than the others, richer and old and certain thing, a voice that had commanded this hunt for longer than Kesh had been alive. Third Weeper, you broke formation. You will answer for that. But say again, a courier, gold-hulled, show me. This was the moment Kesh had feared. The warden wanted proof. A real Third Weeper would have censored data, a visual, a Chinese letter. But Kesh had thought about this while he built the voice, and he had built the answer in. He did not send a picture because a picture could be checked. He sent hunger. He sent, in the choir's own grammar, the thing a hunter cannot resist and cannot verify, a description just detailed enough to be real and just vague enough to demand haste. Warden, there is no time to send the full sweep. It is drifting, its drive is failing. If we range it too hard it may wake and run. Gold hull, courier lines, low crew, deep holds. I have it marked. Come and see with your own eyes before it is gone. I have never lied to the choir. Come. And here was the thing Kesh had understood, listening to them kill all night. The choir could not imagine being deceived, because they had never once been the deceived. Deception was their art, their birthright, the weapon they turned on everyone else. It had simply never occurred to any of them in 100 years of hunting that the crying in the dark might be crying at them. The warden weighed the risk of a drifting fortune against the small, nagging wrongness of a broken formation weeper. And because she had never in her life been prey, she did not recognize the taste of the hook in her own mouth. Hold it, the warden sang, and her voice had changed, gone bright and greedy and eager, the exact voice Kesh had heard the weepers use over the Emberwright hours ago. Hold it, Third Weeper. I am coming. The mother comes. Keep it marked and do not let it wake. The great dark shape behind the ring began to move. She's coming, Kesh said into the ship wide, and he heard his own voice shake, not with fear now but with the enormity of it. Captain, the mother's underway. She took it. She's coming toward the far mark, past the edge of the ring. She's leaving the 4 weepers behind to hold us, and she's bringing the whole mother ship in to feed on a courier that doesn't exist. Then she's about to be the loneliest thing in the dark, DeLevin said. Oduya, the weepers first. 4 of them between us and her, and they'll be on us the moment they realize the mother's been called away by a ghost. We have to be through them before that happens. Talk to me. And now the second half of the plan unfolded. The half that turned the Emberwright from a ship that survived hunters into a ship that hunted them. Because the forge had not stopped working. All through the boarding, all through the building of the voice, Oduya's vats and furnaces had been running, and the old forgemaster had not been idle. He had been doing the thing the choir would never think to fear. He had been making more ships. Not real ships, ghosts. The Emberwright carried in her deep holds kilometers of raw stock and a printer array that could throw structure fast and cheap when it didn't need to be strong, and a decoy did not need to be strong. It only needed to look to a nervous hunter's sensors like prey. Oduya had grown a dozen of them while Kesh built his voice. Hollow shells of printed hull, each with a scrap emitter inside throwing the sensor shadow of a fat crippled ship, each trailing a wisp of vented gas that read like a wounded drive. He'd built them cheap, and he'd built them fast, and he had seeded them out into the dark around the Emberwright on cold, ballistic tracks, so that now, to the 4 frightened weepers, the void did not hold one fat tender. It held a dozen fat drifting victims, scattered and blind and ripe, and the weepers, who were hunters, who could no more resist a wounded ship than the warden could resist a courier, broke formation to chase them. They're splitting up, Kesh reported, and he almost laughed. Captain, they can't help it. They see wounded ships and they scatter to take them. They're doing to themselves exactly what they do to everyone. They're coming apart to feed. Same trap, Oduya growled with satisfaction, watching the weepers spread out across the dark toward his hollow ghosts. Every predator's got the same weakness, Captain, and it's the same one they think makes them strong. They can't not hunt. You put meat in the water and they lose their formation and their discipline and their sense every time because hunting is all they are. Watch. The Emberwright, unarmed, unarmored, a smithy with engines, moved through the scattering weepers like a shark through startled fish. And one by one she took them. And she took each one differently, because a forge is not a gun and does not do the same thing twice. The first weeper closed on one of Oduya's ghost ships, and as it moved in to board the hollow decoy, which Oduya had packed with the same monofilament web that had gutted the boarders, and a charge to fling it, burst, and wrapped the weeper's own hull in a shroud of molecule-thin wire that sliced into its skin and fouled its ports and blinded it, and the Emberwright's cutting lasers finished it while it thrashed. The second weeper, more careful, hung back from the ghosts and turned to hunt the tender itself, and the Emberwright let it come, let it close to boarding range thinking it had found the real prize, and when it was near enough the great salvage arms reached out into the void. The arms built to catch a broken ship and hold it still, and they caught the weeper the way they'd been built to catch anything, and held it, and the drop forges were not the only hammers on that ship. Oduya had grown a mast driver out of a keel press in the last hour, crude and single-shot and enormous, and at a range of 200 meters, he drove a 40-ton billet of raw alloy through the held and helpless weeper from bow to stern. The third and fourth weepers understood too late that the wounded ships were bait and the tender was death, and they did the thing the choir had never once had to do. They turned to run, and Kesh in the forge deck heard them break onto the open band screaming to the warden for help, screaming, "Come back, mother, come back. The fish bites, the fish bites." And he heard the warden far off now, deep in her greedy run toward a courier that did not exist, hesitate. "She heard them," Kesh said. "Captain, she heard the weepers scream. She's slowing, she's going to turn back." "Not yet she isn't," Delevan said. "Kesh, the voice, keep her running. You built her a hook, keep it in her mouth." And Kesh, without hesitating, sang again, in the warden's own voice, in the choir's own grammar on their private band. And this was the hardest thing he did that night, and the coldest, and the one he was proudest of. He counterfeited the weepers. He took the terror on the open band and he answered it himself, in the choir's fluted tongue, so that the warden, torn between her screaming children behind her and her golden courier ahead, heard a new voice cut across the panic. "Warden, ignore them. It is a ruse of the tender. It throws false voices. Do not turn back. We have the courier. We have it. Its holds are splitting with gold. Come now or lose everything." "That won't hold long," Kesh said, sweating, his hands flying. "She's not stupid. The moment she gets a clean look at where the courier's supposed to be and sees nothing there, she'll know. I can buy minutes, not more." "Minutes are enough," Delevan said, "if we spend them right, because we're not going to catch the mother, Kesh. She's too big and too fast and she's got a head start. We can't chase her down." A pause, and then the iron in her voice went molten. "So we're not going to chase her. We're going to make her come to us, all the way in, right into the forge's mouth, same as everyone else. And to do that we need her to believe, right up until the last second, that she's still the hunter." Kesh understood, and the scale of it took his breath. "You want to give her the courier," he said. "You want to give her something real to find." "I want you and Oduya to build me a lie she can hold in her hands," Delevan said. "A gold-hulled courier, drifting and blind and fat, right where your voice told her it would be. Big enough and real enough that when she finally gets her clean look, she sees exactly what she was promised and she stops being suspicious and starts being hungry and she closes in to feed. And when she opens her mouth to swallow it," the captain let it hang, "the courier is going to be us." The forge deck erupted into motion. They had perhaps 20 minutes, and they spent every second of it in the greatest single act of making the Emberwright had ever performed. Oduya threw every vat and furnace and printer the ship owned at a single task, to dress the tender as prey. They could not change her mass or her drives, but they did not need to. They needed her at range, to a greedy hunter's eye, to read as a gold-hulled courier drifting dead in the dark. So they printed a skin. They grew sheets of gold-toned hull cladding and flew them out on the salvage arms and hung them over the Emberwright's blunt working body, wrapping the smithy in the false gleaming lines of a rich, soft courier. They vented gas to read as a failing drive. They dimmed the ship to the cold dark of a vessel with dying power. They took the most dangerous ship in the sector and they disguised her, with the ship's own limitless craft, as the fattest, softest, most trusting victim the warden had ever been offered, which was the one thing in all the dark that the warden of the choir could not, would not, had never been able to resist. "She's coming back around," Kesh breathed, listening to the mother turn. The counterfeit had held just long enough. The warden had reached the empty mark, found no courier, begun to suspect, and then her sensors had swept back across the dark and found, drifting exactly where a courier should be, a gold-hulled ship, dead and blind and rich. And the suspicion had drowned in the hunger. "She's seen us. She's seen the courier. Captain, she believes it. She's coming in to feed." "Then we're almost done," Captain DeLevin said quietly. And on the bridge of her ship, wrapped in gold, surrounded by the wreckage of 4 hunting ships, with the great mother of the choir turning her whole vast greedy bulk toward the disguised forge, she watched the warden come, the way 100 victims had watched the choir come, and she waited to close the mouth one last time. "Let her in," said the captain, "all the way in. And then, Kesh, then we stop pretending and we show her what we really are. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes over a working ship in the last minutes before everything is decided, and the Emberwright had it now." Kesh felt it as he stood in the forge deck watching the gold cladding go up over the ship's blunt, honest body, watching the smithy dress itself as prey. All around him, the crew moved with the economy of people who have run out of things to say and have only things to do. The furnaces still breathed. The vats still churned out the last of the false hull, the last of the vented gas rigs, the small deceptions that would sell the lie. But the frantic edge of the earlier hours had burned off, and what was left underneath was something Kesh had not expected, something he would spend a long time trying to name afterward. It was not fear. It was not even really courage, not the loud kind. It was closer to what he'd felt as a boy on the relay station, lying in the dark with his parents on either side of him, listening to the void being sorted into channels, a settledness, a sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly the thing he was for. The whole ship had it. 41 people who had come out into the deep to fix broken things, discovering in one long night that they had been, all along, the most dangerous crew in the sector, and meeting that discovery not with bloodlust but with a grim and steady peace. Oduya came and stood beside him while the last of the gold went up. The old forgemaster's suit was scorched and his hands were black to the wrist, and he looked, Kesh thought, entirely content. "You know what the choir never understood," Oduya said, not really a question, watching a salvage arm smooth a sheet of false hull over the ship's flank. "About a forge." "Tell me," Kesh said. "They looked at us and they saw a fat, soft ship full of metal and they thought, there's a thing to be taken apart." The old man's beard split in a hard smile. "Because that's all they know how to do, take apart. A hunter unmakes. That's the whole of the art to them, finding a made thing and reducing it. They've been so good at it for so long that they forgot there was any other way to be." He turned and looked at Kesh, and there was something almost gentle in the scorched old face. "But a forge doesn't unmake, boy. A forge makes. That's the whole difference, and it's the difference they're about to die of. You can't win against a maker by taking things apart because a maker just makes more. You cut off our guns, we grow guns. You board our seams, we make the seams into teeth. You steal our voice, we make a better voice. There's no bottom to it. There's no end to what a thing that makes can become, and the choir have spent 100 years fighting only things that break." He looked back at the gold going up over the ship. "They finally met something that builds, and they brought it 100 years worth of appetite, and no idea at all that appetite could ever be the thing that kills you." Kesh was quiet for a moment. Below them, through the deck, he could still hear it faintly if he listened. The low animal sound of the mother ship's hold, the 411, Though he didn't have the number yet, only the sound of the kept and the caught, waiting in the dark for nothing. "There are people in her," Kesh said. "In the mother I keep hearing them." "I know," Oduya said. "I hear them too, that's why we do this careful." He put one black-handed grip on Kesh's shoulder, brief and heavy, the way Captain DeLevin had at the start of the night an age ago. "That's why it matters that we're a forge and not a warship, son. A warship would kill the mother and call it a victory and never once think about what was in her holds. A warship solves things by ending them, but we don't end things. We fix them. We're going to walk into that ship and we're going to fix her, take her hunt away from her without taking away the 400 lives she's sitting on. And that's the hardest kind of work there is, and it's exactly the kind of work this crew has done its whole life. On broken ships, in the dark, when nobody was watching and nobody was coming to help." He let go. "This is just a bigger wreck than usual." On the bridge, Captain Marn DeLevin watched the mother ship grow on her board and made herself say nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She had spent the night making decisions that traded her crew's safety for a chance at something larger, and she had made every one of them clear-eyed, and now the last of them was made, and there was only the waiting. She thought about the 100 ships the choir had taken before this one. She thought about the crews of those ships, people like hers, people who had heard crying in the dark and turned toward it, because that was what decent people did, and had died of it. She thought that every one of those crews had been, in the last accounting, better than the thing that killed them, and that being better had not saved a single one, because being good is not the same as being ready. Her crew was both. That was the whole of it. That was what she had built all these years, thinking she was only running a repair ship. She had built 41 people who would run toward the screaming and also, when they got there, be the most dangerous thing in the dark. Good and ready. Kind and terrible. A hand held out to the hurt, and a fist closed around the thing that hurt them, both at once, both true. "Petter," she said quietly, "how long?" "She'll be in grapple range in 4 minutes, Captain," the young officer said. His voice was steady. Everyone's voice was steady now. "Then we're ready," DeLevin said, and found that they were. "Kesh, Oduya, get your team to the seams and get suited. The moment she grapples us and blows her tubes, her harvesters come in hours and you go up hers. Quiet as you can. She's not going to know you're aboard until her ship's already dead around her, and I want it to stay that way as long as it possibly can." A pause. "And Kesh." "Captain." When you called her in, the voice, the courier, all of it. That was the finest piece of work I've seen in 30 years in the dark. Something moved under the iron of her voice, warm and quick and gone again. "Your parents raised a listener. Tonight you turned into something more than that. Go finish it." Kesh went to the seam with his suit half sealed and his heart very quiet, and Oduya came behind him, and the 2 weld divers behind him, 4 ordinary people about to walk into the mouth of the thing that had eaten 100 crews. And as he went he could feel the whole ship around him. The gold false skin and the roaring true forges beneath it, the smithy that had dressed itself as prey to catch the hunter of prey. And he understood that this was the oldest human trick there was, older than ships, older than the void, the trick the choir had never once had turned on them. Look weak, be strong. Hold out the soft open hand and let them reach for it and be ready. Far off in the dark, the mother of the choir sang her greedy little song and came in to feed, and did not know, could not have known, that the fat gold trusting thing she was reaching for had reached back a long time ago. The mother ship came in. She was enormous. On Kesh's board she filled the whole tactical picture, a vast dark spiny thing built for holding, not fighting, a hunter that had never needed to be quick because it had never once had to catch anything that ran. It came toward the gold-wrapped Emberwright with a terrible patient confidence, and Kesh could hear the warden singing to herself as it came, low and pleased, the private satisfied music of a predator that has spent 100 years being right about the world. "There you are," the warden sang to the false courier. "There you are, little gold thing, drifting so quiet. No one is coming for you. No one heard you but me." Kesh, listening, felt the last of his fear go out of him entirely, and what was left was so clear and so cold it frightened him. "She thinks we're already hers," he said. "Captain, she's not even bringing up her weapons. She's not going to shoot. She's going to grapple us and board us and take us whole. She thinks she's harvesting a corpse." "Good," said DeLevin, "because we don't want her weapons up either. Here's the thing about the mother, Kesh, and it's the thing that's had me worried all night. We can't do to her what we did to the Weepers. We can't gut her and we can't drive a billet through her because of what's inside her." Her voice was very level. "There are people in that ship, the prey she's kept, hundreds of them in her holds, every one of them a survivor of a crew that came running when it heard someone cry. If we kill the mother, we kill them too, so we're not going to kill her." A pause. "We're going to take her, whole, the same way she spent a century taking everyone else. We're going to board her, and we're going to walk into her mouth on purpose, and we're going to shut her down from the inside before she can hurt what she's holding." Kesh understood then the last shape of the reversal, and it was perfect and it was terrible. The whole night had been the choir's own method turned back on them, step by step, their lure, their greed, their trap, all reflected. And this was the final reflection. The choir boarded, so the humans would board. The choir walked into ships and gutted them from within, unseen until it was too late. So a small team of humans would walk into the mother, quiet and unseen, and gut her hunt from within. And the warden would never know they were aboard until her ship was already dead around her. "Who goes?" Kesh asked, though he already knew he would be one of them, because he was the only one who could read the mother's systems, the only one who spoke the choir's language, the only one who could tell a control room from a killing floor by the sound of it. "A small team," DeLevin said, "small and quiet. Oduya because nobody knows machines like Oduya. Two of his best well-divers because they can cut through anything and they've spent their lives working in places that want to kill them. And you, a beat. You most of all, Kesh, because you're the ears. You're the one who can hear the ship's heart and tell us where to put the knife. And because it was your voice that called her in, and I think you've earned the right to be there when she stops singing." "I'll go," Kesh said. They had minutes. The forge dressed them the way it had dressed the ship. Oduya's vats grew them hard suits in the hour they had, not soldiers' armor. The Emberwright had never carried such a thing, but something better suited to the work. Well-divers' rigs, thick and self-sealing, grown with cutting gear built into the arms and magnetic soles for walking a hostile hull. The same equipment his people used to crawl inside dead ships and bring them back to life, turned now to a darker task. And when the mother's great grapples finally reached out and seized the gold-wrapped Emberwright, when the warden, singing her triumph, locked the two ships together and blew her boarding tubes and sent her harvesters swarming into the disguised forge to take it apart. The forge took them apart instead in the seams, the way it had taken the first wave, quiet and total. And while the warden's harvesters died in the belly of the ship they thought they were gutting, 4 humans in well-divers suits went the other way, up the mother's own boarding tubes, into the hunter's own ship, unseen. It was the strangest passage of Kesh's life. He had spent that whole night listening to the choir from a distance, through cones and code. Now he was inside them, walking the dark corridors of the mothership with Oduya and the 2 divers, and it was worse than he had imagined and also, in a way he had not expected, smaller. The choir were not monsters. That was the thing that stayed with him. They were people. Their corridors had the marks of ordinary living, worn places where hands had rested, small decorations, the debris of long voyages. They had simply built their whole civilization around the idea that everyone else in the dark was food, and had never once been made to question it, and so they had never grown the part of a people that knows what it is to be prey. They had no defenses against being hunted, because it had genuinely never happened to them. They did not even post guards on the inside. Why would they? Nothing ever got in. Kesh led. He led by ear exactly as he had promised, reading the ship's heart through the deck and the walls, following the deep thrum of the drives, the higher whine of the control systems. the sound the choir's chatter made as it flowed toward one place, the bridge, the warden's own perch from which she sang the whole hunt. And underneath everything faint and terrible, he heard the other sound, the sound that made his jaw set and his steps quicken, the sound of the hold. The sound of hundreds of living things packed into the dark of the mother ship. The prey. He heard them and he did not let himself stop, because there was an order to this and the hold had to come second. First, the ship had to be made safe. First, the warden had to stop singing. They reached the mother's control spine, and Oduya and the divers went to work. They did not fight their way in. That was not the craft. They found the ship's nervous system, the great trunk lines that carried power and command from the warden's bridge to the drives and the weapons and the grapples and the hold, and Oduya, the old smith who had spent his life learning where a ship's strength lived and how to change it, laid his hands on the mother's heart and began, quietly, to unmake her. Not to destroy her, to disarm her. The well divers cut, precise and surgical, and Oduya rerouted and severed and locked, and one by one the mother's teeth went dead. Her weapons, then her grapples, then her drives. The whole vast hunting body of her going still and harmless around the warden who still sat singing on her bridge, wholly unaware that 4 humans had walked into her ship and were, silently, taking it away from her. And Kesh, while they worked, went to the one system that was his. He found the mother's transmitter, the great beacon array from which the crying voice was thrown, the murder song, the recorded Alu grief that had lured 100 ships to their deaths. He put his hands on it. And he understood, standing there in the heart of the thing that had hunted the gentle for a century, exactly what the last move of the night had to be. Because it was not enough to take this one ship. It was not enough to free this one hold. The choir was more than one mother. The dark was wide, and somewhere out in it there were other wardens, other weepers, other crying beacons wearing the stolen voices of the kind. Kill this one ship and the hunt went on. The only way to end it, the only way to protect all the preyed upon, everywhere, forever, was to take the weapon itself away from the hunters. To take the lure, the crying voice, the trap that only worked because no one knew it was a trap, and to give it to the prey. "Captain," Kesh said, on the low channel back to the Emberwright. "The mother's disarmed. Oduya's got her heart, she's harmless, but I need one more thing before we take the warden, and it's the most important thing we do tonight." He laid it out. "I've got the beacon array. I've got the master copy of the lure, every voice they've stolen, every code they use, the whole architecture of the crying. If I broadcast it, not the lure itself, but the shape of it, the fingerprint, the how to know it, on every open band, to every settled world and gentle species in reach, then the crying stops working. Forever. For everyone. Every ship that hears an SOS from now on will be able to check it against the fingerprint and know, in a heartbeat, whether it's a real cry or a choir hook. The choir have hunted for 100 years because they were the only ones who knew how the trap was built. If everyone knows," he stopped, "then no one ever walks into it again. We don't just save the people in this hold, Captain. We save every ship that would ever have answered a false SOS anywhere forever. We take the hunter's best weapon and we hand it to the whole galaxy as a shield." The channel was quiet for a moment. "Do it," said Captain DeLevin. "Do it, Kesh, and then let's go take the warden." He did it. Standing in the heart of the mothership, Kesh Auren took the murder song apart one last time, and instead of building a better lie out of it, he built the truth. The clean, plain, unmistakable fingerprint of the choir's crying, wrapped in a warning in 40 languages, everything a gentle ship needed to know the hook from the hand. And he threw it out on every open band the mother owned, hard and wide and loud, into the whole listening dark. He turned the hunter's 100-year secret into common knowledge in a single breath. And somewhere out there, he knew, on relay stations and gentle ships and the worlds of the preyed upon, listeners like his parents, like him, would hear it, and would never again lose a child to a stolen voice crying in the night. Then they went and took the warden. She was still singing when they came onto her bridge. She was old, older than Kesh had guessed, a great gray coiled thing at the center of her dead ship, still crooning her triumph over a courier she thought she was harvesting, still utterly certain that she was the hunter and the whole dark was hers. She did not understand, even when the four humans in their scarred well-divers suits walked onto her bridge, what she was looking at. She had no framework for it. Ships did not fight back. Prey did not board. The hunted did not come, quiet and unseen, into the hunter's own heart and stand there in the ruin of her power. For the length of one long moment, the warden of the choir simply stared at the impossible thing in front of her, and her song faltered and broke and stopped. What she sang, and for the first time in 100 years, the voice of the choir made the sound its victims made. What are you? And Kesh Auren, 22 years old, the son of listeners, who had been raised on the sound of the dark, and had spent this one long night learning the hunter's own song only to turn it inside out, answered her. He answered her in her own fluted tongue, in the choir's own grammar quietly, so that she would understand every word. "We heard you crying," he said, "so we came." They freed the hold. That took the rest of the night and most of a day, and it was the part Kesh would carry with him always, more than the traps in the seams or the ghost ships or the taking of the warden. Because the mother's hold, when Oduya's divers cut it open, held 411 living souls, the remnants of 30-odd crews from a dozen gentle species, some of them held for years, people who had gone into the dark to help someone who was crying and had been swallowed for it, and had waited in that hold without any hope at all for a rescue that the whole grim logic of the galaxy said would never come. And it came. It came in the shape of a forge ship and a handful of tired smiths, and when the hold opened and the light came in, the sound the 411 made was not a sound Kesh had a name for either, and this one he would keep. Among them were the Alu. Of course there were Alu. Small, soft-feathered, fluted-voiced, the gentlest of the gentle, the ones the choir had hunted longest and hardest precisely because they could never stop themselves from answering a cry. And near the front of them, when the light came in, was a young one, barely more than a fledgling, who had been born in that hold and had never in her short life seen a star. She looked up at Kesh in his scarred suit, this strange, soft creature whose people's stolen grief had baited 100 deaths, and she was not afraid of him, because she had never learned that anything from outside the hold could be anything but another prisoner. And Kesh knelt down in front of her, and he did not know what to say, so he said the only true thing there was. "You're not food," he told her, and let his translator carry it in her own fluted tongue, the same tongue the choir had stolen. "You never were. Come on, I'll show you the stars." The Emberwright went home slow. She towed the mother behind her, disarmed and full of freed souls and captured choir both, back toward the settled dark where there were courts that would want to know what the warden had done, and worlds that would want to embrace the 411, and listeners everywhere who had already heard Kesh's broadcast and were already, that very night, turning away from false SOS calls all across the sector, safe now, because a boy on a forge ship had handed them the hunter's own secret. The crying in the dark still came, it would always come, but it did not work anymore. The choir had lost the only weapon that had ever mattered, not because it was destroyed, but because it was shared. And that, in the end, was the whole of it, and Kesh understood it as he stood in the ear on the way home with the fledgling Alu asleep against his side, both of them listening to the clean, quiet dark. The choir had built a trap out of mercy. They had taken the kindest thing that gentle people did, the going, the answering, the nobody dies alone in the dark on my watch, and they had turned it into a hook, and for 100 years they had been proven right. That kindness was a weakness, and the dark belonged to whoever was willing to lie. And then they had cried out a stolen sob into the night, the same as they always did, expecting the same fat, trusting fish. And the thing that answered had come, exactly as they'd planned. It had come running. It had walked wide open into their mouth. And then it had closed its own around them, because the humans had understood the one thing the choir in all their long cruelty never had, that answering a cry is not weakness, That going toward the hurt in the dark is not what gets you killed. It is the strongest thing a people can do, so strong that you can build a whole ship around it, a forge that makes anything, a crew that runs toward the screaming, and turn the hunter's own trap inside out and hunt the hunters and set the prey free, and still, at the end of it, kneel down in front of a frightened child and mean it when you say, "We heard you crying, so we came."